Good morning, everyone. Pastor George here with today's episode of A New Thing. And today we're going to be talking about Christ is King, Christ the King. What does this mean? Why am I talking about it? And why we need to be wise, as always, and avoid basically being online. Maybe that's the best thing we can do for our faith is just, best thing we can do in general is maybe just unplug the internet. I'm kidding, of course. I need to play World of Warcraft, so I don't know how I would do that without the internet. But maybe everything but World of Warcraft can be taken offline. Please and thank you. So, what I wanted to talk about today was this passage right here. We're actually going to look at two passages. So, first up is Proverbs 15:1 and 2. Of course, the book of Proverbs is all about Proverbs, wise sayings, and that's, if you read it, that's all it is, just verse after verse. Sometimes they're connected to each other, sometimes they're not, but in Proverbs 15 1 and 2, we actually do kind of have this double thing about how to use words. So it says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. So God cares a lot about how we use our words. Jesus says we're going to be held accountable for every idle word we speak, which for me, not great. Oh, not there yet. But for maybe for many of us, not great. But all that's to say is Proverbs is going to set this up, right? Because this is going to be my general take on what we're going to be talking about today, which is this controversy over whether we can say Christ is King. And it's going to form generally how we should think about the words that we use, right? All right, other thing, Revelation 17. I'm actually only looking at one verse here, this verse right here, verse 14. It says, it just is bringing up about how people are going to fight against the Lamb. It says they will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Obviously, the Lamb, right here, refers to Jesus, right? Here, Revelation, and this isn't the only place in the New Testament, this is just one of them, refers to him as a king, King of kings, Lord of lords, Kurios to Kurion, ton Kurion, Basileos ton Basileon, in Greek. I believe that's what it is. Hopefully I got that right. Anyway, and so, right, so here it seems pretty obvious that Christ is king, right? He's King of kings, Lord of lords. There's a famous part in Handel's Messiah that's all about this, right? In the Hallelujah chorus. So why am I talking about this? Well, and I'm not going to dwell on the politics here. I don't really care too much about that, but it set off this firestorm that erupted outside of politics and got into our normal culture, and I want to avoid two things from happening, which is what I'm going to talk about. But first, just to give you guys context. So Candace Owens, if you don't know who she is, she was a political commentator at the Daily Wire, which is a right-wing news source run by Ben Shapiro. Maybe you've seen videos of him destroying people with facts and logic. Anyway, she was one of the commentators. I don't really know all of the details behind it, but essentially she was let go. And she has been, before she was fired, she would keep posting Christ is King, Christ is King, Christ is King. And she said, Christ is King is trending worldwide. The media's attempt to cross him again has failed. Happy Sunday. There, it's probably a reference to her previous employer, the Daily Wire, who fired her. Just so you know, Daily Wire was founded by two guys, but one of them is Ben Shapiro, who's Jewish. And so she's been sparring with him, and they have accused her. Part of the reason they fired her was for anti-Semitism. So all this is to say is that this phrase, Christ is King, caught on, and a lot of people on Twitter were using it. I'm not going to play the clip, but this is from Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is like a far-right weirdo, anti-Semitic guy. Young, not like someone you might imagine, but young. Uses very slick presentation. Um, and here you can see that in the video. The video itself is like 2 minutes. Again, I'm not going to give it airtime. But what he says is the Daily Wire is Israel first, and they try to obfuscate, that means hide, obfuscate that fact. They do not believe Christ is king, as though he does. you know, and all this is to say is that you can even see in this fan account of his, right, that they use crosses and stuff like that. I think what's important to realize, and this is what sets this off, right, is that this became a big phrase because now everyone is fighting about whether or not you can say Christ is king. And so you have people talking about how you can't say it. It's a anti-Semitic dog whistle, right? You can't say Christ is king because if you say Christ is king, you're really saying something about Jewish people. And of course, people who say that respond to that, go, absolutely not. That's not what we mean by that. This is Christian teaching. Christ is king, right? Like Revelation 17. So, we should be able to say it, as whatever we want because it's the truth. And, I actually agree with both those. I think it depends who you are and what you mean by it, right? So, for example, there's this. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what this is. I don't even need to tell you. Because you are probably so familiar with images and stories from the Bible that you know what this is. But if you want, I will tell you, which I will. So this is the sign that Pilate affixes above Jesus, right? Because, or it's usually shown affixed. Sometimes it would be hung around the neck. It's told that it makes it a sign. Right, and on it says in 3 different languages, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Right, and that's what it says here. It says it in here. It's in Hebrew. At the top, that's because I think this is probably from like the Renaissance or something, or maybe it's from not a modern painting. So it wouldn't have been Hebrew. Would have been Aramaic. I think is probably what it would have been, but it would have been but then you have Greek under that, and then at the very bottom you have the Latin, and that's why you ever see the thing that says INRI, right? You can see it there at the bottom. It says Jesus, and his crown is kind of covering the thorns, but Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, which is Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews in Latin. And then in Greek you have Jesus ho Nazaraios ho Basileos ton Judaion, which is just Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. And then in Hebrew you have Yeshua Natsariah Melecha de Hayuda. So you would have just there. It's those are the languages. All that's to say is here, right, we have Jesus being referred to as a king. But here it depends on how you mean it. And I mean, as Christians, we read so much double meaning into this, right? And I think we should. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But how do you think Pilate intended this to come across, right? So do you think Pilate intended to be like, this is king? This is Jesus Christ. He's king, right? And of course not. This is meant by the Romans to be derogatory and to not only say something about Jesus, but to say something to the Jews as well, right? Because what are they trying to get across here? They're trying to get across is this guy, he's your king. And look what we did to him. What do you think we'll do to you if you try and rebel against us, right? If the king is up there, whipped, bleeding to death, choking, because that's how crucifixion kills you. It kills you by asphyxiation. Then what are you guys gonna do to us? That's the message that the Romans are sending here, right? And this is one of those moments where it's like, well, the words that you use depend on the context and the way that you mean them. Now, of course, as Christians, we read a great double meaning into this because we go, ironically, Pilate uses this as a way to attack the Jews and to attack Jesus. But interestingly enough, it's right? It's ironic because he thinks he's being dismissive of Jesus, but he's actually paying him the exact honor that he deserves in the language that he's using. It's just that everyone's so sinful that they don't realize it. And so here, right, we have that double meaning. So we can say, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews, and we can mean that in a very faithful and good way. But we can also mean that in a bad way. And so we have to be very careful about and looking at people who use this phrases like this importantly. But like, what do we mean when we say Christ is King, right? Because oftentimes people will attach this to political, as we've seen things like, what does that mean? Well, I think that what we can see here is the way it's traditionally been understood in Christianity and in the confessions of our faith. What does it mean when we say Christ is King? So this will be familiar to you guys. I actually think we're doing this one this Sunday, which I didn't plan for. It just happened to be it because I'm doing all the days in order. This is the Heidelberg Catechism, right? Or maybe we just did this. See, the thing is I always make up the outlines, and so I don't know if I already looked at this week or if we did this. No, we didn't do it last week because last week was Easter. Yeah, this is it. Anyway, this is what it says. It says, why is he called Christ that is anointed? And it says, because he has been ordained by God the Father and anointed to be with the Holy Spirit, to be our chief prophet and teacher, who has fully revealed to us the secret counsel and will of God concerning our redemption, our only high priest, who by one sacrifice of his body has redeemed us, and who continually intercedes for us before the Father, and our eternal King, who governs us by his word and spirit, and who defends and preserves us in the redemption obtained for us. So there are these, this is what we call the threefold office. That's what it's called, the threefold office of Christ, that he is prophet, priest, and king. And those are kind of his roles for us in his lifetime and in the church. And so here, right, what does it mean? It means it's personal, over our personal lives, right? Over us as Christians and over the church. He governs us by his word and spirit like a king does, right? It's not a political order at all. Then we have this one from the Westminster Shorter Catechism, right? How doth, and remember, just doth is the old form of present tense in English, kind of a fancy form, so you can just say does, so just make it a present tense. So how does Christ execute the office of a king? Christ executes the office of a king in subduing us to himself, in ruling and defending us, and in restraining and conquering all his and our enemies. Again, right, not in a political sense here. Not in the sense of Jesus has made us to, or uses us to establish things as a rule, Christian rule on earth, because obviously that's not how it was understood in the early church, because no one was in power. That's a couple hundred years away, right? Not saying that we can't and shouldn't see our ideals lived out in political systems. Of course we should, but like, that's when the Bible speaks about Jesus being a king. That's not what he's talking about, right? He's not talking about a political kingship. It's just not there in the text, right? Any way that we would interpret that would come from a lot later. That's why Jesus says the kingdom of God is among you, right? It's not some kind of future political kingdom that he's building. I talked about this a while ago when I talked about the words that Jesus uses to refer to himself, and he doesn't use Messiah a lot, and that's not because it's not true, but it's because the Messiah had so much political connotation that he preferred Son of Man and other titles. Obviously, he didn't deny being the Messiah, but that wasn't the primary way that he kind of acted or identified himself. So just to go back to this, right? I'll just keep this up, or these two things, right? The tweets and stuff. I'm assuming amongst millions or thousands or whatever. It got big enough to bleed into like mainstream news sources. So, I assume a lot of people were posting it, especially right around Easter. All these sorts of things. So, is saying Christ is king anti-Semitic? In its pure form, in the way that the church has intended, in the way that it's meant in the Bible, No, right? Of course, anyone could get offended, right? You could just say, well, that disagrees with me, it's offensive, blah, blah. That's, I don't think, what's at stake here. Um, I think that, like, saying we should say Christ is king because he is. He has defeated death. He has risen from the grave. He is King of kings, Lord of lords. It is not wrong to say Christ is king. However, let's take ourselves back to Proverbs 15, right? How should we be using these words? Should we be using them as a way of talking about some sort of political agenda? Should we be using Christ as king in reference to attacking our opponents online? Should we be using it to harass people? No. Um, because we don't want it to become a phrase that's co-opted for other purposes, right? As Christians, we should desire it to maintain its pure form, which is describing fact about who Jesus is and what that means for the world. I think back to a few years ago, so I'm sure many of you are familiar with this symbol. There was a time for a while when, now the debate is, there's a lot of debate about this because I was here at the time, whether or not this was started intentionally to make people mad or not. But I'm sure most of you know this. This is the okay sign. Like, oh, okay. And I use it. Everyone uses it. It's fine. But a few years ago, there was a whole hubbub about using this because people began to use this as a way to either trick people or to legitimately show support for white supremacy. And the reason I say trick people is because I think it was started as a joke. I think a bunch of people online went, hey, let's see if we can trick journalists into thinking that the OK symbol is a white supremacist symbol. Because this was right after Trump was elected and everyone was frothing at the mouth. The sky was falling, all that type of stuff, right? And so I think a bunch of young guys online did start it as a joke, but it eventually snowballed and then was started to be used unironically in that way. Which is why people wanted it removed from the emojis and stuff like that. Luckily, it's not. It's fine. You can use it. Don't let anyone tell you you can't. Again, it depends on context, right? Proverbs 15, 1 through 2. A gentle answer turns away truth, but harsh words stir up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly, right? It's how you use your words. It's your intention behind them. And of course, we don't know everyone's intention, but we can tell from someone like Nick Fuentes, who's not part of a church, who just cares about politics and says anti-Semitic stuff all the time. What do you think he means by that? Do you think he means that, oh, I believe that Jesus Christ is king, he's ruler of my life? His fruits do not bear that out. So what does he mean by it? I think it's pretty obvious he's using it in the way that Pilate is using it here, as an insult, as something to demean someone. Now, just because he does that, does that mean that none of us can say that? Of course not, right? We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can walk, right? We can say this thing, but we also need to be discerning and understand that there may be certain contexts or ideas that are people who say this. That doesn't mean we necessarily agree with them, right? If someone goes, oh yeah, when I want to, kill all this ethnic group and also Christ is king. We go, yeah, Christ is king. We're with you. It's like, no, calm down. These things can have, just because someone says something we agree with doesn't mean that we have to agree with them on everything they said before that, right? This is why, same is the other way, right? Just because, there might be someone we generally disagree with doesn't mean that if they're right on one thing that, we can't say that they're right on that one thing. All this is to say is that we can say Christ is king. We should. But we also need to be discerning and not just do trends or join on things because we agree with the basic premise of whatever is going on, right? And honestly, again, we're just going to return back to how I started. Maybe, social media should just be destroyed. Maybe that's the best possible solution to what's going on. Keep the internet so I can play World of Warcraft. That's very important. But we can destroy social media. That's fine. You guys can email me with prayer requests. We don't need this EPC messenger. All right, you guys have a wonderful day. I will see you guys on Sunday. And then we're gonna only have we're not doing Bible study. We're gonna have a new thing next week, and then I'm gonna be gone doing work study stuff. So anyway, have a great day. Peace out.